Ava walked through the crowded hallways of Lincoln High School with her head held high, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her biology textbook clutched against her chest. She moved with purpose, weaving between groups of chattering students without making eye contact. It wasn't that she was shy exactly, but Ava had learned that keeping a low profile was the safest way to navigate high school drama. At 17, she was a senior with bigger things on her mind than teenage politics. Her report card showed straight A's, and 3 different colleges had already sent acceptance letters with scholarship offers. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, had told her she was on track to be valedictorian. But none of that mattered as much to Ava as making sure her little brother got home safely every day. 12-year-old Damon was everything to her. Their parents both worked double shifts at the hospital, leaving early in the morning and coming home exhausted at night. So it fell to Ava to walk Damon to his middle school each morning and pick him up every afternoon. She didn't mind. In fact, she looked forward to those 20 minutes they spent walking together, talking about his day or helping him with homework problems. Damon was small for his age, with thick glasses and a love for comic books that made him an easy target for bullies at his own school. Ava had taught him to stay close to teachers during lunch and to never walk alone to the bathroom. She'd also started teaching him some basic self-defense moves their uncle had shown her, though she hoped he'd never need to use them. Their Uncle Tony was a former boxer who now worked as a security guard at the mall. Every weekend he'd come over to their house and spend time in the garage, showing Ava and Damon how to throw a proper punch, how to block, and most importantly, how to stay calm under pressure. Fighting is always the last option, he'd tell them. But when someone won't leave you alone, you need to be ready to protect yourself. Ava had absorbed these lessons well. She was stronger than she looked, with quick reflexes and a natural understanding of balance and timing. But she'd never had to use any of it. She was good at reading situations and avoiding trouble before it started. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Ava dropped Damon off at his school, watching until he disappeared through the front doors, then jogged the 4 blocks to her own school. She made it to first period chemistry just as the bell rang, sliding into her seat near the back of the classroom. That's when she noticed him staring. Blake Patterson sat 3 rows ahead of her, turned halfway around in his seat, his eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was hard to miss at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders from playing varsity football. His blonde hair was always perfectly styled, and he wore expensive clothes that his parents bought him. Most of the girls at school thought he was handsome, but there was something about his smile that made Ava uncomfortable. Blake had a reputation. Everyone knew he was trouble, but he was also popular and came from a wealthy family that donated money to the school. Teachers seemed to look the other way when he acted out, and other students were either too scared or too impressed to stand up to him. He'd been held back a year, making him 18 and bigger than most of the other seniors. For weeks now, Ava had noticed Blake watching her. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Maybe they just happened to be in the same places at the same time. But then she started paying attention and she realized he was following a pattern. He'd position himself where he could see her in the cafeteria. He'd take longer routes to his classes that happened to pass by her locker. He'd find excuses to be in the hallway when she was walking to the parking lot after school. It made her skin crawl, but she tried to ignore it. Ava had dealt with unwanted attention before. Usually, if she didn't respond, guys would eventually lose interest and move on to someone else. But Blake seemed different, more persistent, more entitled. The first time he actually spoke to her was on a Wednesday morning. Ava was at her locker, switching out her books between second and third period when she felt someone step up close behind her. Too close. She could feel his presence before she turned around. "Hey there, beautiful," Blake said, leaning against the lockers with one arm above her head, effectively trapping her. His voice was smooth, confident, like he was used to getting whatever he wanted. "I've been thinking we should get to know each other better." Ava took a step back, but there wasn't much room to move. "I'm not interested," she said firmly, keeping her voice level. She'd learned from her uncle that showing fear only encouraged bullies. Blake's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm just trying to be friendly." He reached out as if to touch her arm, but Ava quickly stepped sideways. Out of his reach, I said, "I'm not interested." This time her voice was harder, leaving no room for misinterpretation. For just a moment, Blake's friendly mask slipped, and she saw something ugly underneath. But then other students started walking by and he straightened up, his smile returning. "We'll talk later," he said, making it sound like a promise and a threat at the same time. After that, things got worse. Blake started making comments when he passed her in the hallway. Nothing too obvious, nothing that would get him in trouble if a teacher overheard, but enough to make Ava feel uncomfortable and on edge. He'd whistle softly when she walked by. He'd make jokes about her appearance to his friends just loud enough for her to hear. He'd show up in places where she normally felt safe, like the library or the quiet courtyard where she ate lunch. Ava tried talking to her parents about it, but they were so tired from work that they barely had energy for conversation. When she mentioned that a boy at school was bothering her, her mother just said, "Boys will be boys, honey. He probably has a crush on you. Just ignore him and he'll move on." But Blake wasn't moving on. If anything, he was getting bolder. He started timing his movements to coincide with hers, making sure their paths crossed multiple times throughout the day. He'd find excuses to be near her locker when she was there. He'd sit at tables near her in the cafeteria, staring openly while she tried to eat. The worst part was how helpless she felt. Ava was used to being in control, used to handling her own problems. She'd been taking care of herself and her little brother for years. But this was different. Blake hadn't technically done anything wrong yet, nothing she could prove or report. He was just there, constantly, making her feel watched and hunted. She started changing her routines, taking different routes to class, eating lunch in different places. But somehow Blake always seemed to find her. It was like he'd made a game out of it, and she was the prize he was determined to win. 3 weeks into this psychological torture, something shifted. Blake's comments became more explicit. His staring became more intense, and Ava began to realize that he wasn't just some lovesick teenager who would eventually give up. There was something calculating about his behavior, something predatory that made her stomach turn. She started staying later at school, hoping to avoid him in the parking lot. She began asking teachers if she could help with after-school activities, anything to change her schedule and throw him off. But Blake seemed to anticipate her every move. The breaking point was coming, and Ava could feel it. She just didn't know it would involve the person she cared about most in the world. The harassment had been going on for 3 weeks when Blake decided to escalate things. Ava could sense the change immediately. Where before he'd been content to watch and make occasional comments, now he was actively interfering with her daily life. It started small. Her locker wouldn't open one morning, and when she finally got it unstuck, she found her combination lock had been tampered with. The numbers were all mixed up, and it took her 15 minutes to reset it, making her late for first period. She couldn't prove Blake had done it, but she'd seen him lingering near her locker the day before. Then her car tires were let down in the school parking lot. Not slashed, just deflated enough that she couldn't drive home. She had to call her Uncle Tony to come help her, and he spent 20 minutes refilling them with a portable air compressor, while she stood there feeling embarrassed and angry. "You sure you don't know who did this?" Tony asked, studying her face carefully. He'd always been good at reading people, a skill he'd developed during his boxing days and perfected as a security guard. "I have an idea," Ava said quietly, "but I can't prove anything." Tony nodded slowly. "Sometimes proof comes later. Right now you need to trust your instincts. If someone's targeting you, they're not going to stop until you make them stop." But Ava wasn't ready for confrontation yet. She still hoped the situation would resolve itself somehow. Maybe Blake would get bored and move on to someone else. Maybe his attention would shift when basketball season started. Maybe she was overreacting. Those hopes died the following Monday when Blake cornered her in an empty classroom after school. Ava had been helping Mrs. Rodriguez organize supplies for the chemistry lab when Blake appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Rodriguez had just stepped out to make copies, leaving Ava alone with boxes of equipment. "Finally," Blake said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "I've been trying to get you alone for weeks." Ava's heart started racing, but she kept her voice steady. "The teacher will be back any minute." "No, she won't. I saw her in the copy room. Those old machines take forever." Blake moved closer, and Ava could smell his cologne mixed with something else. Arrogance, maybe, entitlement. "What do you want, Blake?" She positioned herself behind the lab table, putting some distance between them. "I think you know what I want." His voice was different now, lower and more aggressive. "I've been patient with you. I've been nice. But you keep playing hard to get, and honestly, it's getting old. I'm not playing anything. I've told you I'm not interested. Ava glanced toward the door, calculating whether she could make it past him. Blake laughed, but there was no humor in it. See, that's where you're wrong. You don't get to just say no to me. Do you know who my family is? Do you know what kind of connections I have? I don't care who your family is. You should care. Blake's voice turned cold. My father sits on the school board. My mother chairs the scholarship committee. One word from me and those college offers you're so proud of, they disappear. Ava felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Her scholarships were her future, her way out, her chance to build a better life for herself and help her family. The thought of losing them made her feel physically sick. You can't do that, she whispered. I can do whatever I want. But I don't want to hurt your future, Ava. I want to be part of it. Blake stepped around the lab table, closing the distance between them. All you have to do is be nice to me. Spend some time with me. Show me the respect I deserve. The way he said respect made Ava's skin crawl. She'd heard that tone before. From boys who thought girls owed them something just for existing. Boys who couldn't accept that no meant no. And if I don't? She asked, already knowing the answer. Blake's smile was cold and predatory. Then things get difficult for you. And not just you. I know all about your little brother at Jefferson Middle School. Damon, right? 12 years old in 7th grade. Walks to school by himself every morning since you drop him off. Ice flooded Ava's veins. Leave my brother out of this. That's up to you. Play nice with me and Damon stays safe. Keep fighting me and, well, Blake shrugged. Accidents happen, especially to small kids who don't pay attention to their surroundings. Before Ava could respond, the door opened and Mrs. Rodriguez walked back in, carrying a stack of freshly copied worksheets. Blake immediately stepped back, his demeanor shifting back to that of a polite student. Oh, hello, Blake, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Are you here to help with the lab setup? Just stopped by to ask Ava about the chemistry homework, Blake replied smoothly. Thanks for the help, he added, looking directly at Ava with those cold eyes. I'll see you around. After he left, Ava stood frozen in place, her hands shaking slightly. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed immediately. Are you okay, dear? You look pale. I'm fine, Ava managed. Just tired, but she wasn't fine. Blake's threat against Damon had changed everything. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her little brother, with his thick glasses and comic book collection, was now a target because of her. The thought made her feel sick and furious at the same time. That night, Ava couldn't concentrate on her homework. She kept thinking about Blake's words, about the casual way he'd threatened Damon. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That a classmate had made vague threats? That she felt uncomfortable? Without proof, without witnesses, it would be her word against his. The next few days were torture. Blake seemed to be everywhere, watching her with that knowing smile. He'd nod at her in the hallways like they shared a secret. He'd position himself where she could see him during lunch, reminding her of his presence without saying a word. Worse, Ava started noticing changes in Damon's behavior. Her usually cheerful little brother became quiet and jumpy. He started asking her to walk him all the way to his classroom door, instead of just to the school entrance. When she asked what was wrong, he'd just shrug and say everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Ava could see it in the way Damon kept looking over his shoulder, in the way he flinched when unexpected sounds occurred. Something had scared him, and she had a terrible suspicion about what it might be. Her suspicions were confirmed on Friday afternoon. Ava was running late picking up Damon because she'd stayed after school to work on a physics project. When she finally arrived at Jefferson Middle School, she found Damon sitting on the front steps, hugging his backpack to his chest. Sorry I'm late, she said, but Damon didn't respond with his usual smile. Can we go home? He asked quietly. On the walk home, Ava tried to get him to talk, but Damon remained unusually quiet. It wasn't until they were almost at their house that he finally spoke up. Ava, what would you do if someone bigger than you wanted to hurt you? Ava's blood ran cold. Has someone threatened you? Not exactly threatened. But there was this older kid at school today. He knew my name, knew things about me. He said he was a friend of yours from high school. What did he look like? Ava asked, though she already knew. Tall blonde hair, expensive clothes. He seemed nice at first, but something about him scared me. He asked a lot of questions about what time I get to school, what route we take home, stuff like that. Ava stopped walking. Blake had actually approached Damon. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Did he touch you? Did he hurt you? No, but he stood really close and he wouldn't move when I tried to walk away. He said he hoped we'd be seeing more of each other soon. Damon looked up at his sister with worried eyes. Did I do something wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble? Ava knelt down to Damon's level, putting her hands on his shoulders. You didn't do anything wrong, but I need you to promise me something. If you see that boy again, you get away from him immediately and find a teacher. Don't talk to him, don't be polite. Just run. Okay, Damon said. But she could see he was scared. That night, Ava lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Blake had shown his true colors now. He wasn't just some entitled rich kid with a crush. He was dangerous and he was willing to use her brother to get what he wanted. She thought about her Uncle Tony's words. Sometimes proof comes later. Right now you need to trust your instincts. Her instincts were screaming that Blake wasn't going to stop. He'd escalate until he got what he wanted, or until someone made him stop. And since the adults in charge seemed oblivious to what was happening, it looked like stopping him was going to be up to her. The next morning, Ava made a decision. She was done running, done hiding, done hoping the problem would solve itself. Blake had made this personal when he involved Damon, and now she was going to make it personal right back. But first, she needed proof. And she had an idea about how to get it. Ava spent the weekend preparing. She researched everything she could about documenting harassment, about self-defense laws, about what constituted evidence. She also spent time in her Uncle Tony's garage, practicing the moves he'd taught her until her muscles remembered them perfectly. You seem different, Tony observed on Sunday afternoon as they worked through blocking techniques. More focused. I might need to use this stuff soon, Ava said, throwing a combination punch at the heavy bag hanging from the ceiling. Tony caught her wrist as she pulled back from the bag. Using these skills should always be your last option. Have you tried talking to adults about whatever's going on? Adults don't always listen, Ava replied. Sometimes you have to handle things yourself. Just remember what I taught you about de-escalation. Walk away if you can. Fight only if you have no other choice. And if you do have to fight, end it quickly and decisively. Monday morning, Ava put her plan into action. She'd downloaded a recording app on her phone and positioned it to capture audio whenever Blake approached her. She also started keeping a detailed log of every interaction, every threat, every time she saw him near Damon's school. Blake seemed to sense something had changed. During first period, he kept turning around to stare at her, his expression more intense than usual. When the bell rang and students started filing out, he lingered by the door, clearly waiting for her. Ava activated her recording app and walked past him, but Blake fell into step beside her. You seem tense, he said conversationally. Everything okay? Everything's fine, Ava replied, keeping her voice neutral. I hope so. It would be terrible if stress started affecting your grades, or your little brother's safety. There it was, recorded clearly. Ava felt a surge of satisfaction, but she kept her expression blank. I don't know what you're talking about. Blake's laugh was low and menacing. I think you do. I saw Damon again yesterday, by the way. Such a sweet kid. It would be a shame if something happened to him because his sister couldn't learn to be friendly. Stay away from my brother, Ava said, her voice harder now. That's up to you. You know what I want. The next few days followed the same pattern. Blake would make veiled threats and Ava would record them. She documented everything. The times he followed her, the way he showed up near her locker, the threatening messages he had his friends pass along. She was building a case, gathering evidence that even the most dismissive adult would have to take seriously. But Blake was getting impatient. On Thursday afternoon, Ava found a note in her locker. Written in Blake's distinctive handwriting, it was short and to the point. Stop playing games. Meet me in the old gym after school or I pay Damon another visit. Ava's hand shook as she read it. The old gymnasium had been closed for renovation for months. It was isolated, forgotten. The perfect place for Blake to corner her without witnesses. Every instinct she had told her not to go, but the threat against Damon was clear. She thought about calling her Uncle Tony, but he was at work and wouldn't be able to get to the school quickly. She considered telling a teacher, but which one? Most of them barely knew her name, and Blake's family had influence that reached all the way to the school board. In the end, Ava made a choice that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She would meet Blake, but on her terms. She spent the rest of the day preparing, both mentally and physically. She ate a protein bar for energy, did stretching exercises in an empty bathroom, and reviewed everything her uncle had taught her about staying calm under pressure. After the final bell rang and most students had left for the day, Ava made her way to the old gymnasium. The building was dark and quiet, with only emergency lighting casting long shadows down the hallway. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The gym was eerily silent, filled with stacked wrestling mats and covered exercise equipment. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through dirty windows high up on the walls, creating pockets of light and shadow across the floor. "I was starting to think you wouldn't show." Blake's voice came from somewhere in the darkness. Ava stepped further into the gym, letting her eyes adjust. "I'm here, what do you want?" Blake emerged from behind a stack of mats, and Ava immediately noticed he wasn't alone. 3 of his friends flanked him, all members of the football team, all bigger than her. Her heart rate spiked, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I want what I've always wanted," Blake said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Respect, cooperation, understanding." "You mean submission," Ava replied. "Call it whatever you want. The bottom line is, you're going to start being nice to me. You're going to go out with me when I ask. You're going to show everyone at this school that Blake Patterson gets what he wants. And if I don't?" Blake's smile was cold and predatory. "Then we have a problem. See, I've been patient with you, but my patience is running out. You've been collecting evidence, haven't you? Recording our conversations, writing things down, that's very smart, but it's also very insulting." Ava's blood ran cold. How did he know about her recordings? "You think you're so clever," Blake continued, pulling out his phone. "But I have friends everywhere, including friends who work in the IT department. Every text you've sent, every recording you've made, every note you've written, I know about it." He showed her his phone screen, and Ava saw her own text messages displayed there. Messages she'd sent to her parents, to her Uncle Tony, to her best friend describing what Blake had been doing to her. "How did you get those?" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that all your evidence is about to disappear, and then it's going to be your word against mine. And we both know whose word carries more weight in this town." One of Blake's friends stepped forward, holding out his hand. "Give me your phone." "No," Ava said firmly. "It wasn't a request," Blake said. His friendly facade was completely gone now, replaced by something ugly and aggressive. "Give him your phone or this gets much more unpleasant for you." Ava looked around the gym, calculating distances and escape routes. The main door she'd entered through was now blocked by 2 of Blake's friends. There was an emergency exit on the far side of the gym, but she'd have to get past Blake to reach it. "You know what your problem is?" Blake said, starting to walk toward her. "You think you're better than everyone else. You think your good grades and your college scholarships make you special. But you're not special. You're just another girl who needs to learn her place." "My place isn't with you," Ava said, backing away as he approached. "Actually, it is. See, I've decided I want you as my girlfriend, not because I like you, but because you've been difficult. And I don't like difficult girls thinking they can tell me no." Blake lunged forward suddenly, reaching for her phone, but Ava was ready. She'd been ready since the moment she walked into that gym. She sidestepped his grab and brought her knee up sharply, aiming for his solar plexus. But Blake was bigger and stronger than she'd anticipated. He caught her leg and twisted, sending her off balance. She hit the floor hard, her phone skittering away across the polished wood. "There we go," Blake said, standing over her. "Much better. Now we can have a real conversation." Ava rolled away from him and sprang to her feet, her mind racing. 4 against 1 weren't good odds, especially when all 4 were bigger and stronger than her. But she had advantages they didn't know about. She was faster, better trained, and most importantly, she was fighting for something that mattered. "You don't have to do this," she said, trying one last time to de-escalate the situation. "Just leave me alone, leave my brother alone, and we can both walk away from this." Blake laughed. "I don't think you understand. You don't get to negotiate anymore. You had your chance to do this the easy way." He nodded to his friends and they started to close in. Ava found herself surrounded in the center of the gym. Nowhere to run, No adults to help her, no backup plan except the training her uncle had drilled into her head. Speed beats size, Tony's voice echoed in her memory. Technique beats strength, and when you have no choice but to fight, you fight to win. Blake reached out to grab her arm, confident that his size and numbers gave him all the advantage he needed. But as his fingers closed around her wrist, Ava realized something that Blake didn't. He had picked the wrong girl to mess with. What happened next would be over in seconds, but those seconds would change everything. For Blake, for Ava, and for every student at Lincoln High School who had ever felt powerless in the face of a bully. The confrontation Blake had been pushing toward for weeks was finally here, but it wasn't going to go the way he expected. The moment Blake's hand clamped down on Ava's wrist, everything her Uncle Tony had taught her kicked in like muscle memory. Time seemed to slow down as her training took over, her mind becoming crystal clear despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Blake's grip was strong, but he was holding her wrong. He'd grabbed her wrist like he was trying to control a typical teenage girl who would panic and try to pull away. He had no idea he was dealing with someone who had spent years learning how to turn an attacker's strength against them. Instead of pulling back like Blake expected, Ava stepped forward and slightly to the left, using her free hand to grab his wrist where he was holding hers. In one fluid motion, she twisted her trapped hand clockwise while pushing his hand counterclockwise. The joint lock was perfect, and Blake's overconfidence worked against him. His grip broke instantly as pain shot through his wrist and thumb. But Ava wasn't done. Still holding his wrist, she pivoted on her left foot and drove her right elbow up into his solar plexus, just below his rib cage. The impact drove all the air from Blake's lungs in a sharp whoosh. His eyes went wide with shock and pain as he doubled over, gasping for breath. But Ava's combination wasn't finished yet. As Blake bent forward from the elbow strike, Ava brought her knee up to meet his descending face. The impact wasn't hard enough to break his nose, but it was enough to snap his head back and send him stumbling backward, blood flowing from his nostrils. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. Blake's 3 friends stood frozen, their mouths open in shock. They'd expected to help their leader intimidate a scared girl. Instead, they'd just watched that same girl take down their 200-pound friend with a combination of moves that looked like something from an action movie. Blake hit the wall of stacked wrestling mats and slid down to a sitting position. One hand clutched to his bleeding nose. The other pressed against his chest as he struggled to breathe. His face was pale with shock and pain, and for the first time since Ava had known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "What the hell?" one of his friends finally managed to say. But Ava wasn't paying attention to them. Her focus was entirely on Blake, who was looking up at her with a mixture of pain, rage, and disbelief. She could see him trying to process what had just happened, trying to figure out how the quiet girl with the good grades had just taken him down like he was nothing. "Stay down," Ava said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We're done here." But Blake's ego couldn't handle what had just happened to him. Despite the blood on his face and the difficulty breathing, he started to push himself back up to his feet. The rage in his eyes was unmistakable. "You little witch," he gasped, his voice hoarse from the hit to his solar plexus. "You think you're tough? You think this is over?" Ava took a step back, maintaining her distance. Her uncle had taught her that winning the first exchange didn't mean the fight was over. Often, it just made an angry opponent more dangerous. "It's over if you make it over," she said. "Walk away, Blake. Take your friends and walk away." But Blake was beyond rational thought now. The humiliation of being taken down by someone smaller than him, especially in front of his friends, had triggered something primitive and ugly in him. He wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand and started moving toward her again. "Nobody disrespects me like that," he snarled. "Nobody." This time, when Blake came at her, he was more cautious. Instead of just reaching out carelessly, he lowered his shoulder and charged, trying to use his size and weight to tackle her to the ground. It was actually a smarter approach than his first attempt, but Ava was ready for it. She waited until the last possible second, then sidestepped to her right while grabbing Blake's outstretched arm. Using his own momentum against him, she helped him continue in the direction he was already going. But faster than he intended. Blake crashed into the stack of wrestling mats behind where Ava had been standing, sending them toppling in all directions. He hit the concrete wall hard enough that the impact echoed through the empty gymnasium, but this time he didn't get back up right away. Blake lay among the scattered mats, groaning and holding his shoulder. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the kind of pain that made it hard to think about anything else. "Blake!" One of his friends called out, starting to move toward him. "Stop," Ava said sharply, and something in her voice made all three of them freeze. "He's fine. He's just hurt and embarrassed. But if any of you want to continue this, I'm ready." She turned to look at each of Blake's friends in turn, and they could see in her eyes that she wasn't bluffing. The quiet girl they'd thought would be an easy victim had just systematically dismantled their leader, and she looked like she was just getting warmed up. "This is crazy," one of them muttered. "She's crazy." "No," Ava said calmly. "I'm just tired of being pushed around, and I'm very tired of someone threatening my family." Blake was finally starting to sit up, his face pale and his breathing shallow. The fight had lasted less than 10 seconds from start to finish, but it had felt like an eternity. He looked up at Ava with something that might have been respect mixed with his pain and anger. "How?" he asked quietly. "My uncle taught me," Ava replied. "He said bullies count on their victims being too scared or too weak to fight back. He was wrong about the scared part, but you were definitely wrong about the weak part." Blake struggled to his feet, his friends moving to help him. His expensive shirt was torn, his nose was still bleeding, and there was a large red mark on his shoulder where he'd hit the wall. He looked nothing like the confident predator who had cornered her just minutes before. "This isn't over," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. "Yes, it is," Ava replied firmly. "You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave my brother alone. And you're going to find someone else to bother, preferably someone your own size." "And if I don't?" Ava picked up her phone from where it had fallen, checking to make sure it wasn't damaged. "Then we'll do this again. Except next time I won't be so gentle." Blake's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment, but he didn't move toward her again. The physical pain was bad enough, but the damage to his reputation was going to be even worse. Word would spread quickly that Blake Patterson had been taken down by a girl half his size. His carefully constructed image as the school's alpha male was lying in ruins along with the scattered wrestling mats. "Come on," one of his friends said quietly. "Let's get out of here." As they helped Blake toward the exit, he turned back one more time. "You think you won something here today?" he called out. "You think this makes you tough?" "No," Ava replied. "I think this makes me free." After they left, Ava stood alone in the empty gymnasium, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she realized she was more affected by what had just happened than she'd let Blake see. She'd never actually hurt someone before, never used her training in a real fight. The feeling was strange, a mixture of satisfaction, relief, and something that might have been guilt. Blake had deserved what happened to him, but that didn't make it easy to process. Ava picked up the scattered wrestling mats, stacking them back where they belonged. It seemed important to leave the place the way she'd found it, to not let the chaos of the fight linger in the space. As she worked, she thought about what would happen next. Blake might try to get revenge, but she doubted it. He'd been thoroughly humiliated, and trying to come after her again would only remind people of his defeat. More likely, he'd find some way to save face and move on to easier targets. But even if he did try something, Ava wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe freely. The constant tension, the looking over her shoulder, the fear for Damon's safety, all of it was finally gone. Walking toward the exit, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: pride. Not just in her ability to defend herself, but in her decision to stand up when it mattered. Her Uncle Tony had always told her that the measure of a person wasn't whether they could fight, but whether they would fight when something important was at stake. Today, she'd found out what she was made of. And she liked what she'd discovered. As she pushed open the gymnasium door and stepped back into the normal world of Lincoln High School, Ava knew that everything had changed. Blake Patterson's reign of intimidation was over, and it had ended not with adult intervention or administrative action, but with one girl who decided she'd had enough. The hallway was empty except for a janitor mopping the floor at the far end. He nodded at her as she passed, and Ava nodded back. wondering if he had any idea what had just happened in the old gymnasium. Probably not, she thought. And that was fine with her. Some victories didn't need an audience. Word spread through Lincoln High School like wildfire, though not in the way Ava had expected. She'd been prepared for Blake to spin the story his way, to paint himself as the victim of an unprovoked attack. Instead, she discovered that one of the janitors had been in the hallway outside the old gymnasium and had heard enough of what happened to piece together the truth. More importantly, Blake's own friends couldn't keep quiet about what they'd witnessed. By Tuesday morning, whispered conversations filled the hallways. Students who had never spoken to Ava before nodded respectfully when she passed. Others stared openly, trying to reconcile the quiet. Studious girl they knew with the person who had single-handedly taken down the school's most notorious bully. Blake himself was notably absent from school Monday and Tuesday. When he finally returned on Wednesday, he looked different. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by something more cautious and subdued. The expensive clothes were the same, but he wore them like armor now, as if trying to hide behind the familiar trappings of his wealth and status. Their first encounter after the fight happened in the hallway between second and third period. Ava was at her locker when she sensed someone approaching from behind. Her body tensed automatically, but when she turned around, she saw a Blake she barely recognized. His nose was swollen and discolored, with tape across the bridge where it had been reset. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he moved carefully as if his ribs were still sore. But more than the physical changes, something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor. "Ava," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Blake." She kept her voice neutral, watching his hands and body language for any sign of aggression. "I wanted to talk to you." "So talk." Blake glanced around the hallway, noting how other students had stopped to watch their interaction. Some had their phones out, clearly hoping to capture whatever happened next. "Not here," he said. "Can we go somewhere private?" Ava almost laughed. "You think I'm stupid enough to go somewhere alone with you again?" "No, I guess not." Blake rubbed his face with one hand, wincing slightly when he touched his nose. "Look, what I did to you, what I was doing to you and your brother, it was wrong. I know that now. You knew it then, too. You just didn't care. You're right." Blake's admission surprised her. She'd expected denials, excuses, maybe even threats of revenge. "I thought I could do whatever I wanted because of who my family is, because I was bigger and stronger. I thought you'd just give in eventually. And now I know better." Blake looked directly at her for the first time, and Ava saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that it's over. I won't bother you or Damon anymore." Ava studied his face carefully, looking for signs of deception, but Blake seemed genuinely defeated, his arrogance replaced by something that looked like shame. "What about your friends? What about your threats to ruin my scholarships?" "My friends won't be a problem." "As for the scholarships," Blake pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "I deleted all the information I had about you. Photos, messages, everything. And I told my parents I was being investigated for harassment. They're more concerned about protecting the family reputation than helping me get revenge." This was unexpected. Ava had been prepared for ongoing conflict, for escalating retaliation. She hadn't been prepared for Blake to simply surrender. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm scared of you," Blake said simply. "Not just because you can fight, though that's part of it. I'm scared because you showed me what happens when someone finally stands up to bullies like me. You made me realize that all my power was just an illusion." The bell rang and students started moving toward their next classes. Blake stepped aside to let Ava pass, but she paused beside him. "Blake," she said quietly, "what you did to me was wrong, but what you were planning to do to my brother was unforgivable. Stay away from both of us." "I will," he replied. "I promise." As the days passed, Ava watched Blake carefully, waiting for signs that his apparent change of heart was just another manipulation. But he kept his word. He avoided her in the hallways, changed his lunch schedule so they wouldn't be in the cafeteria at the same time, and when they did cross paths, he looked away rather than staring at her with that predatory intensity. More importantly, there were no more incidents involving Damon. Her little brother's cheerful personality gradually returned as the threat to his safety disappeared. He started walking with more confidence again, stopped looking over his shoulder, and began talking excitedly about his classes and friends. "You seem happier," Damon observed one afternoon as they walked home from school together. "I am happier," Ava replied. "Remember that boy who was bothering you? He won't be a problem anymore." "What happened to him?" Ava thought about how to explain it in terms a 12-year-old would understand. Sometimes people who act tough are really just scared inside. When someone finally stands up to them, they realize they're not as powerful as they thought they were. "Did you stand up to him?" Something like that. The story of Blake's defeat began to take on a life of its own as it spread through the school and into the community. Details got exaggerated with each telling until some versions had Ava single-handedly fighting off a dozen attackers. She tried to correct the more outrageous rumors, but eventually gave up and let people believe what they wanted. What mattered more than the specific details was the effect the story had on the school's culture. Other bullies became noticeably more careful about their targets, aware that the quiet kids might not be as defenseless as they appeared. Students who had previously been victims found their voices, reporting harassment instead of suffering in silence. Mrs. Henderson, the principal who had dismissed Ava's earlier complaints, called her into the office 2 weeks after the incident. Ava expected trouble, maybe suspension for fighting on school grounds. Instead, she found Mrs. Henderson looking embarrassed and apologetic. "I owe you an apology," the principal said without preamble. "You tried to report Blake's behavior to me multiple times and I didn't take your concerns seriously. That was my failure and it put you in an impossible situation." "It's over now," Ava replied. "Is it?" "Because I've been doing some investigating since word reached me about what happened in the old gymnasium. Blake Patterson has been terrorizing students at this school for months, maybe years. And nobody, including me, did anything to stop it." Mrs. Henderson pulled out a thick folder. "I've talked to 17 different students who say Blake harassed, threatened, or assaulted them. 17, Ava. And not one of them felt safe enough to come forward until they heard about what you did." Ava felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that Blake's reign of terror was finally being exposed, but sadness for all the students who had suffered in silence. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now Blake faces consequences for his actions. Real consequences. The school board is taking this seriously, especially since his behavior created a liability issue for the district. He's being transferred to another school, and there's talk of criminal charges for some of his more serious offenses." 3 weeks later, Blake was gone from Lincoln High School entirely. His parents had quietly enrolled him in a private military academy in another state, hoping that structure and discipline might teach him the lessons he'd failed to learn at home. On his last day, Blake sought out Ava one final time. She found him waiting by her car in the parking lot after school, but unlike their previous encounters, she felt no fear or tension. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said. "I heard. I wanted to thank you." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Thank me. For stopping me before I did something that would have ruined my life permanently. I was heading down a dark path and I couldn't see it. Or maybe I could see it and just didn't care." Blake looked older than his 18 years, worn down by the consequences of his actions. "The military school isn't going to be fun, but maybe that's what I need." "Maybe it is." Blake extended his hand and after a moment's hesitation, Ava shook it. His grip was firm but respectful, nothing like the grabbing, controlling way he'd touched her before. "I hope you get into all those colleges," he said. "You deserve good things." "So do you, Blake, but you have to earn them now." After he left, Ava stood alone in the parking lot, processing the strange turn her senior year had taken. She'd started the semester as a quiet student focused only on her grades and her family. Now she was known throughout the school as the girl who had brought down Blake Patterson. The attention was uncomfortable sometimes, but Ava had learned to live with it. More importantly, she'd learned something about herself that she'd never known before. When pushed to her absolute limit, when the safety of someone she loved was threatened, she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. Her Uncle Tony had been proud when she finally told him the full story of what had happened. "You did everything right," he'd said. "You tried to solve it peacefully first. You documented the harassment. You only fought when you had no other choice, and when you did fight, you ended it quickly without causing permanent damage." "It doesn't feel like I did everything right," Ava had replied. "It feels like the system failed and I had to fix it myself." Sometimes that's how it works. Sometimes you have to be your own hero. As graduation approached, Ava received her acceptance letters from 3 different universities, all offering full scholarships. Blake's threats to ruin her future had proven to be as empty as his other promises. On the night before graduation, she sat in her room packing boxes, preparing for the move to college in the fall. Damon knocked on her door and came in carrying a comic book. "I wanted to show you something," he said, opening the book to a page showing a female superhero in action. "She kinda looks like you," Ava laughed. "I'm not a superhero, Damon. Maybe not, but you're my hero." Looking at her little brother's earnest face, Ava felt a warmth that had nothing to do with recognition or reputation. She'd fought Blake not for glory or revenge, but to protect someone she loved. That was a victory that belonged to her alone, regardless of what anyone else thought or said about it. 6 months later, she received a letter from Blake at his military academy. It was short and formal, but it contained something she'd never expected: a genuine apology and news that he was working with a counselor to understand and change his behavior. Ava read the letter once, then put it away in a drawer. She hoped Blake would become a better person, but his transformation wasn't her responsibility. She'd already given him the greatest gift she could: the chance to learn from his mistakes. Her own story was just beginning, and she was excited to see where it would lead. But whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she could face them. After all, she'd already proven to herself that sometimes the quiet girl with the good grades was exactly the person you didn't want to mess with.